Welcome to the fourth in a series of noon lectures to be sponsored by the Associated Student Speakers Program. It is a distinct honor to have as our guest today Mr. James Farmer, the National Director of the Congress of Racial Equality. Mr. Farmer is internationally recognized as an articulate spokesman in the struggle for racial equality of all men. He is also involved directly with the social, economic, and cultural problems of the American Negro today. The topic about which Mr. Farmer will speak is the Civil Rights Revolution in America. Shortly after Mr. Farmer's presentation, at approximately 1 o'clock, there will be an informal discussion and question and answer period next door in the men's lounge. All those who wish to come are invited to do so. At this time, it gives me great pleasure to present to you Mr. James Farmer.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman and friends, if in the next few minutes I sound a bit incoherent, it's merely because I'm suffering from an occupational ailment. In the Civil Rights Revolution, many of us find the only time we can get any rest is when we're in jail. And I haven't been incarcerated recently. Yet I took a look at my schedule and find that within a month I'll be down in Bogalusa, Louisiana again, so there's still hope. At least we can dream. But I'm extremely happy to be at UCLA and to see such a large audience. I spoke here, I think, 2 years ago, and also a good audience. I'm always pleased to be here because I know that students of UCLA have been co-workers with us in the fight for equal rights in this area of the country and nationally. You supported us in our fight against Proposition 14, and I want to express the appreciation of all people of goodwill, certainly those whom we happen to represent, for your participation in that fight. And I'm very glad to be here on a day when you're having a demonstration on another issue which is of great concern to all of us. That is, bringing an end to the war in Vietnam. As I look at the Civil Rights Revolution today, I'm convinced of one thing as much as anything else, and that is, if this revolution is to be completed, and if the problems of the slum ghetto are to be dealt with and dealt with adequately, it will take a much more enormous war on poverty than the piddling one which we now have. It will take from $15 to $25 billion a year, rather than the $1.5 billion that now has been appropriated. And where is that kind of money coming from unless it's out of the defense budget, the money that is being wasted and poured down the drain? The Civil Rights Revolution is not over. Every day I hear people in different parts of the country say, well, now, isn't it glorious that we have won the fight and it's all over and we can go fishing? We got the Civil Rights Act of 1964. If that didn't completely do the job, we then got the Voter Rights Act of 1965. So it's all over and let's hold a celebration. Well, nothing could be farther from the truth, my friends. I look at the Civil Rights Revolution now, and I, of course, like anybody else, applaud the victories that we've won in the past. I become reminiscent sometimes and think of the arduous toil that has gone into the building of this revolution. I think of my co-workers in CORE, who for the past 23 years have been hammering away, devising techniques of nonviolent direct action. I remember 23 years ago when CORE was just getting started, we had not a revolution, not a mass movement. We had just a dozen youngsters, college and university students in Chicago, who had been studying Gandhi and had come to the rather logical conclusion that the techniques developed by Gandhi in India of nonviolent direct action could be adapted and applied to the struggle against segregation and discrimination here. So even in those days, 1942 and 43, in cities scattered throughout the North, the East, and the West, we were sitting in at restaurants and standing in at cafeteria lines, standing in theater lines, wading in swimming pools and public beaches, We were getting no publicity at all, hardly any, that is, no television coverage, no radio. If we were lucky, perhaps we'd get a small paragraph on the back page of the Chicago Tribune or the New York Times saying that yesterday about 5:30, a half dozen nuts and crackpots and screwballs sat down at a restaurant and remained there for 2.5 hours or until they were served or thrown out, whichever came first. That was the end of it. But they kept persevering. Now, I think it's extremely fortunate that the Civil Rights Revolution has had an emphasis upon nonviolence. The emphasis which was developed by CORE, carried even further by the movement of Martin Luther King, the bus boycott in Montgomery, then by SNCC and the SCLC. But we would be deluding ourselves if we thought that most Negroes in our country are nonviolent. I think we all know that now. Negroes are no more nonviolent than white people are. Like they tell the story about one sizable Negro, I think he was a professional football player, a tackle, who heard that the Freedom Rides in 1961 had desegregated bus travel in the South. So he went down to test it. And he sat on the front seat of a bus in Alabama. The bus driver said to him, "Boy, get up out of that seat and get into the back of this bus where you belong." He didn't answer. The driver said, "Boy, if you don't get up out of that seat, I'm going to throw you into the back of this bus." The great big fellow stood up to his nearly 7 feet and moved his 300 pounds toward the bus driver, took him by the collar and said, "Look, Bud, you made just 2 mistakes. First, I ain't no boy. And second, I ain't one of them nonviolent Negroes." So, Negroes are not nonviolent. Yet, had there not been an emphasis upon nonviolence in the civil rights organizations, I think that there would have been a bloodbath in our country in the South and in the North long before now. Now, down in Bogalusa, Louisiana, and in Jonesboro, where CORE is extremely active, we work with the Deacons for Defense and Justice. We are a nonviolent organization, and if anyone, including the Deacons, participates in CORE demonstrations, he must pledge himself to nonviolence, our discipline of nonviolence. But I do not feel that I have any right to tell the Negro people of Bogalusa, Louisiana, that they must not, may not, should not, cannot defend their homes if their homes are attacked by the Ku Klux Klan. This is the position that we have taken. They have a right constitutionally to defend their homes, and when the Klan attacks, they are not defended by the duly established upholders of the law, the local police, the county or parish police, and the state police. So unfortunately, it's necessary for them to try to protect their homes. Now, when the law enforcement officials begin doing their job, then there'll be no purpose for the existence of the Deacons, and I would urge them then to go out of existence. Yet, we continue our emphasis upon nonviolent direct action as a civil rights organization. Out of the sit-ins, the freedom rides, the marches, the demonstrations throughout the country in the past several years has come a new motivation on the part of a large segment of our national population. Many, many Negroes have been motivated and willing to go to jail. 200,000 people, including many, many whites, have gone to jail in the past 5 years, or since February 1st, 1960, the beginning date of the Southern Student Sit-In movement, which started in Greensboro, North Carolina. Many have been beaten. Unfortunately, too high a number have been killed. And I might add that of the 3 dozen or so murders of civil rights workers or others engaged in exercising their constitutional rights in the past 2.5 years, there has been not one single conviction. And this fact rankles and convinces us, if we needed any further convincing, that the fight is not over. Our fight really is just beginning. It now is moving into a new stage, it is true, a new phase, because we see broader implications. There was a time, back in 1960 and 61, when the slogan "Freedom Now" was coined, when many of us mistakenly thought that freedom would come suddenly, if not by tonight, then by 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, and that it would come with a flash of lightning, perhaps, and some apocalyptic surprise. But now we know that is not true. We know that the fight for freedom is going to be a long, weary, and wearying battle. We are prepared now for the long haul. We know we are not going to fold up our tents and steal away by next week. The battle must continue. It enters new dimensions, assumes different proportions, but it must go on. Now we recognize, as all of you must recognize, that in spite of the victories which seemed so large when they were won, and victories which still are important and symbolic and affect a number of people favorably, victories such as desegregation of places of public accommodation in city after city in the South, though this desegregation has not yet spread to the suburbs of those cities, to the small towns, and to the rural areas. But the victories are important. Now we can eat a hot dog, we can buy a hamburger, sit down and eat it. You can even go to a movie house, and indeed can check into hotels and motels. That's new. And for the South, it's in a way revolutionary. But I ask you, what change has taken place in the life condition of the average Negro in our country as a result of these small victories? The tragic fact that is pounding us all over the head constantly, day and night now, is that the life condition of the average Negro in our country has remained unchanged by these symbolic victories which have been won. In the South, there is still the fear for one's life. Black bodies still float down the Mississippi River, the old Black River, the Pearl River, and others, unidentified, unheralded, and the crimes unpunished. Unpunished indeed. We've been shocked by the travesty on justice in Alabama recently, when those who killed the seminarian and nearly killed the priest were acquitted and have gone on their way doing physical violence to people whom they hate. I think that there will not be any conviction for such crimes until we have certain changes in the law. First of all, there needs to be a federal law making murder of persons exercising their constitutional rights or of those urging and helping others to exercise their constitutional rights a federal offense rather than merely a state offense as it is now. But even that will not solve the problem, because even if we win that battle and get such a law, then the trials must still go before a jury of 12 members, 12 so-called peers of the defendant, though in a federal court. And the difficulties will be nearly as great in getting a conviction. I am persuaded that what is needed in addition is an amendment to the Constitution providing for a change of venue or taking the trial outside of the state where the crime was committed. Otherwise, there cannot be a fair trial. Not fair for the prosecution, that is. But there needs to be a great deal of discussion on the college campuses and in the classrooms of this. Maybe there are other solutions which you can come up with, which we have not come up with. But it's a problem that has to be dealt with. All around the world, when they kill people in Alabama and Mississippi, the press of the world does not say Alabama killed 2 ministers or Mississippi killed 3 civil rights workers. It says they lynched them in the United States. That's what I saw in Africa when I was over there in January. Now look at the Negro farm worker in the South and see how his life has been changed by the victories which we have fought for so hard and won. Sharecropper, tenant farmer, peon, still living in a shack or shanty or a lean-to on somebody else's land, working it from sunup till sundown with his wife and his kids, as soon as they're old enough to hoe cotton or to pick it if the farm has not been automated. And there is still the same sense of hopelessness. We tell them, but you can go into town tomorrow and you can have dinner at one of the fanciest restaurants. With what? What's he going to use for money? What's he going to use for the clothes that he would need to go in there? What's he going to use for dignity? What's he going to use to get rid of the fear of 102 years of intimidation and persecution? Now, if it is true that the life condition of the Negro in the South has not been significantly changed by our victories, it is even more true in the northern cities. Even more true. Perhaps there will be a change in the South. We hope there will be. As the voting rights bill gets underway, really, and if the federal government will be less timid in its enforcement of the voter rights law, and send in federal examiners more boldly and in more counties, then perhaps the face of the South can be changed politically and thus economically and socially within the next 10 years. But in the North, you tell the youth in the ghetto that we've won victories for you and you're almost free now. And he says, man, you are crazy. Do you have holes in your head? Eat a hot dog and a hamburger? I've been eating hot dogs and hamburgers as long as I can remember, whenever I had the money in my pocket to buy them. Check into a hotel? I don't have the money to check into that hotel, and if I had the money, I could have done it here long before the Civil Rights Act of '64. I have the right to vote now? I've had the right to vote if I'd taken myself down and registered for many, many years. So those two significant bits of federal legislation have not even spoken to his problems. He's been unmoved by them. In fact, it may be worse. He has increased expectations. Because there's been much talk about freedom and about civil rights and about equality for all. That talk has come not only from lowly workers, from Core and SNCC in Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, Georgia, Florida, South Carolina. The talk has gone up the ranks, and we've even heard it from the President of the United States. So he has these heightened expectations. But for him, and his name is Legion, there has not yet been a payoff. This is the crisis of the civil rights movement, and it is a crisis of America. With heightened expectations without a payoff, we might merely get increased frustration. I think that's what we've gotten in the northern cities. Civil rights organizations have been in error in that up until quite recently, we concentrated only on the middle class. We were middle class organizations, essentially, basically. Recruitment by all of them, and I would include mine, Don Smith, who was head of CORE here, up until, say, 2 years ago, when most of our recruitment was churches, schools, civic and social organizations, and fraternal groups. But nobody among us recruited these youngsters from the streets of the ghetto. Nobody, that is, except maybe Malcolm X or some of the other nationalist groups. They were left to their own devices or the devices of the nationalist groups. Now, if you walk down the Watts area, like walking down Harlem, and picked a kid at random, maybe a dropout, ask him whether he knows anything about NAACP and CORE, oh, the initials might ring a vague bell, but it wouldn't go much deeper. I'm sure he's heard the name Martin Luther King, and knows that Dr. King is a great Negro, and he received a prize somewhere across seas. But as to his philosophy or what he stands for, or what he's doing, he doesn't know. And one thing he does know is that it hasn't affected him yet. And this is where it hurts. Now, it's awfully hard for one to try to put himself in the place of anybody else. It's hard for most of us in the civil rights movement. I can't completely tell you how the youngster of 17 who is a dropout in the ghetto, unemployed, from a family where the father is unemployed, and when they are living in a one-room flat. I can't tell you how he feels exactly, because he's not me. I'm not him. I'm not impoverished, nor am I unemployed, nor do the rats bite my children. But I can try. I have to try to put myself in his skin and walk in his shoes. Richard Wright, the late Richard Wright, the novelist, put these words in Bigger Thomas in his novel Native Son. Bigger said, "Sometimes I feel like I'm on the outside of the world, looking in through a knothole in the fence." I think he summed it up. I think he put his finger on it. As I read it, that is the way the youth in the slum ghetto of our northern cities feels. Expelled from society. Alienated, it's true, to use another one of those cliche words, but it has very serious meaning to him. In the summer months, in all of the cities, not only in Los Angeles, he was walking the streets of his stinking hot ghetto. It's too hot for him to be upstairs in that steaming flat, running from rats or chasing cockroaches, or being irritated by the screams of younger brothers and sisters as an entire family were crowded into that totally inadequate quarter, spitting out plasters that fell from the ceiling as other kids stomped on the ceiling, on the roof, the ceiling. Too hot. And the old man, his father, was sitting up there sweltering, because he's out of work now. Kid's a dropout. But the old man finished high school, and the old man pushes a broom and pulls him up when he does get a job. This kid says, "Man, I don't have to finish high school to push a broom and pull him up. I can do it now. I might as well start early." You say it's irrational and illogical. He should prepare himself. First, he's got to get the motivation. He has got to get over a sense of hopelessness. Oh, others have lived in slums and been crowded in ghettos. But for all of the other Americans who lived in slums, there was a hope that had not yet died. There was a sense that their sojourn in the slum was a transitory thing, and that someday they would be out. Man pushed a broom and pulled him up, but he felt with some security that someday he would not push that broom and pull them up. Someday he would hire somebody else to push a broom and pull him up in his shop or store. But this kid has been denied that hope, really. I think I read it accurately when I say that he feels if he does not live 10 years hence in that stinking flat, he'll be in one like it across the street or around the corner. And this is our nation, our great, wealthy America, where there should be hope for all citizens, all people. We must somehow, if the civil rights revolution now is to succeed from this critical juncture, give back to him the hope which has been pirated from him. We must give him back some training and some skill so that he can become a useful member of our society without a ceiling cramping down on his head. That, then, is where the civil rights movement, in my opinion, must go. In the northern cities, and I wish I could paint a more hopeful picture, a happier one. But in the northern cities, while we have been making progress in the South, battering down barriers, people at the risk of their lives and giving their lives have with their bare hands taken stones out of the wall of segregation, trampled around it like it were the wall of Jericho, until it came tumbling down. But in the North, the problems of the Negro in the slum ghetto have very candidly, frankly, gotten worse. Residential segregation is worse than it was 10, 15, 20 years ago in the North. We've had our sights on the South, while things have been getting out of hand in the North. And that's one reason that Proposition 14 was so vitally important, that it be defeated. And now I trust with all my heart that the Supreme Court of California will rule it, knock it out, rule it unconstitutional. In cities in the Northwest, and I just came from the Northwest, where 20 years ago there were no ghettos, there were few Negroes. Now one finds that ghetto lines are hardening and becoming more rigid as the Negro population has increased. Some of the cities, there are still very few Negroes. I was in Bozeman, Montana, a couple of days ago, and I was quite amused to find out that the press was very agitated. The Birches, John Birches, are very strong there in Bozeman. The press was extremely agitated that this racial agitator is coming to town, this jailbird and everything else, the names that they called me. And they gave me more press coverage in one copy of a newspaper than I've ever had before in my whole life. In my speech, I told them that they really shouldn't be so disturbed, that they might well relax, because I had already talked with Bozeman's Negro, and he told me he was not going to demonstrate. But where the Negro population has increased, the ghetto lines have become more rigid and hardened, and de facto school segregation has increased, not decreased, and is increasing. In New York, where we've been banging away, as you've been banging away here in Los Angeles at de facto school segregation, the Board of Education now admits that there is more de facto school segregation in that city than there was 10, 20, 25 years ago. And that the steps which they have taken under our prodding and the pressure of the demonstrations and the school boycotts has merely somewhat slowed down the rate of increase in de facto school segregation. It has not stopped the trend, has not reversed it. Jobs. Oh, a few years ago, I used to, in my peripatetic life, roam up and down the country proclaiming how much economic progress Negroes were making. Well, in a way it was true. We have improved economically, but not comparatively so. I won't be like Governor George Wallace, who in his speeches says, our colored people are making such rapid strides economically, their standard of living is now 10 times as high as the standard of living of colored people anywhere in Africa. As though that's some basis for comparison. The only comparison must be with non-Negroes who live in the United States. And when one looks at those figures, it's unhappy. He finds that the gap between the standard of living of Negroes, the average income of Negroes, and the average income of whites has widened since World War II, has not narrowed. There was a narrowing of that gap during the war because of temporary employment in wartime jobs. But after the war, it began, slowly it is true, but definitely to widen. 1950, average income for Negroes was 53% of the average income for whites. In 1961, it was 52%. There's been a decline. True, we have succeeded, all of the civil rights organizations working together and with the help of college and university students in getting new non-traditional jobs for Negroes in industry. Now many companies are looking for Negro, or a symbolic Negro, for a job in the front office, or a job in management, personnel manager, or a highly skilled job as an engineer, and we're getting some in. This is good. I applaud it. But the figures show us that as 10 walk in the front door for these good, new, non-traditional jobs, more than 100 run out the back door as they are automated out of employment, as machines take their jobs. So, there's a net loss, not a gain. And though, as you know now, the unemployment among Negroes is between 2 and 2.5%, 2.5 times as high as it is among whites, and increasing at the same rate. And this is tragic. Look at jobs in other industries, retail stores, for example. In city after city, I have a couple of days in a city, I take some time and walk downtown, go in a store, just to see if I see a sprinkling of black faces along with the other faces. And usually I don't. When I don't, I call the manager. This is by force of habit, I suppose. And the manager comes up and I say, "Sir, I notice that there are no Negroes here and as sales personnel. Do you discriminate in employment?" He says, "Oh, no, sir, excuse me just a moment." Then he dashes out and comes trotting back with his own private Negro. Says, "No." "We don't discriminate, see, we have one." And this is what made Dick Gregory suggest that what we really ought to do is start ourselves a Hertz Rent-A-Negro company. We are in trouble economically, and there's no question about it. We're drifting backward, and that trend has got to be stopped somehow. There is still the question of police brutality, and this is often a touchy problem. I found so many of our friends who agree with me on housing, agree on employment, but cannot see what I'm talking about when I speak of police brutality. They think that I must be fabricating it. It must come out of my imagination. I must dream it up at night. Or it must be propaganda for some ulterior motive, somebody else pulling the strings behind me, while I open my mouth and say police brutality, police brutality, police brutality. Because they're the middle-class white Americans' experience with police has been quite different from those of the ghetto, slum-dwelling Negro. The middle-class white kid has gone to school, come home from school, crossing busy intersections. It was the friendly policeman on the corner who took him by the hand and helped him across the street, who patted him on the head, remembered his name the next time he saw him. So he thought of the policeman as being a friend. He was a friendly gentleman and his protector. Now he simply cannot conceive of that policeman being hostile or brutal to anyone. That friendly policeman on the corner. But the experience of the slum dweller is quite different, especially if his skin is dark, but not exclusively so. It's true of white slum dwellers, too. Their experience has been one of harassment by the police, physical brutality, it is true, beating, shooting, when it's not called for, and verbal abuse, more often than not. I flew here from Denver, and one of the Corps members in Denver was arrested. He's now suing the police. He was arrested. His crime, really, was that he was escorting a young white woman home from the movie. And as he had gotten out of his car on the driver's side and had opened the door for her out to see her to her door, the cop stopped and said, "Hey, boy, come over here. Show me your identification." And they called him nigger, of course, pushed him around, searched him, roughly pulling his pockets and ramming him repeatedly against the car. And he asked what the offense was. And they said, "Well, we're going to take you in. Come on in with us." So they roughly shoved him into the car, slammed the door, and then they engaged in a dialogue as to what they could charge him with. They agreed that they didn't have and couldn't think of anything right then to charge him with, but they also agreed that they would before they got to the station house. And they did. He was accused of loitering and marauding at unusual hours. And this was his offense. And he is suing now for false arrest, and he won his case because he had witnesses there. But it is still a problem. Now, there is a combination of these problems. What do we do about them? The war on poverty, yes. The war on poverty has some hope, but as I said earlier, it must be a much larger war on poverty than it is now. And it must not be controlled by the politicians so that it becomes pork barrel, so that there is political patronage in the high-paying jobs. It must not be a token war, so that by this time next year we can show that we have reached 1.5 million poor. Reached them with what? And done what with them? How are their lives changed by it? Instead, it must be seen as a long-range war, and much larger than it is now. We must bring into it, in the decision-making positions, policy-making positions, representatives of the poor themselves, so that it will not be a charade of people, experts, looking down on the poor and doing something to help those poor. Instead, helping the poor to help themselves, involving them in their struggle. That's the only way a man can be free. You can't free him. Free him and he's not free. A freedman is not free. The only way he can be free is to do it himself. So we can help him do it. Help him to free himself. But even that's not enough. I applaud what CORE and INVAC are doing in Watt's area now. They have a center and job training, retraining for unskilled, unemployed, and underemployed dwellers of that area. This, to me, holds the possibility, if it receives the support it needs, of preventing worse holocausts in not only that area but other areas of northern cities of our country. The civil rights movement is broadening its sights. We are engaging in community organization. Now we are not leaving out those youngsters who are poor, who don't dress right, who end their sentences in prepositions, who split infinitives. We need them too, as much as we need anyone else. If we don't, then I think we will reap the whirlwind. We are setting up community centers. We are engaging in community organization. We are urging and helping to organize political action, because here too will be one of the keys. In the past, our revolution has been the revolution of the powerless. We've had no power. We've devised techniques which were eye-catching, which were dramatic, using public relations as a substitute for power. Most of the decisions which we required of the political power structure were political decisions. When we learned of those decisions, it was after they had been made, and we then protested them with our bodies, trying to get them then reversed. That's a hard way to do it. The easier way is through political power, through the ballot, through organizing that ballot, so that the votes are not wasted and are not merely poured into the general political soup. We are urging then independent political action, which does not mean new parties. In the South and Mississippi, we support the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. In a northern community, Brooklyn, for example, we have the Brooklyn Freedom Democratic Movement, not a party, where we have not only been registering people to vote, but have been putting candidates up for nomination by the major parties, fighting for their nomination. If they get nominated, then fighting for their election, not only black, but white as well. The criterion is not the color of the man's skin. The criterion is where he stands on issues. We backed Congressman Ryan, Bill Ryan, for the nomination of the Democratic Party in New York. He didn't win. He was not expected to win, but we endorsed him on principle because he had fought right down the line with us on every issue in Washington, in New York, and in the South. And he ran well. We rang doorbells for him and helped him greatly. Now I don't know what we're going to do. He did not get nominated. I can't conceive of CORE or myself supporting or endorsing Beam, who has the backing of the bosses of the Democratic Party, who have been unresponsive to our needs in the past. I think that either we will endorse no one or we will endorse a man who is a Republican running on a fusion ticket, Lindsay. But it is political action that will be stimulated in city after city. I left Cleveland 4 days ago, 3 days ago. I have a hard time remembering. It moves so fast now. But in Cleveland, there is a Negro running for the mayor's office. He has a chance to win. He has the backing of a good number of white persons and white community groups. He is a fine, able, distinguished person, a young man who is now in the state legislature. He has a chance to win because Negroes now alone are 30% of the population and 40% of the registered voters of Cleveland. If he can get pretty much of a solid vote there, and if he can get substantial votes in the white communities among liberals and people of goodwill, then he will win. If he loses this time, he'll be back the next time, and the next, and the next. Eventually, he or someone else will win. And I don't care too much whether he's black or whether he's white, as long as he's going to fight on these issues with us. Now, second, in the ghetto, in addition to political action, we are encouraging economic upgrading of the community. Many people have pooh-poohed at any suggestion that Negroes ought to go into business. I do not pooh-pooh such suggestions. I think that there ought to be businesses started in the slum communities, the ghetto communities. Pool resources if necessary to open up businesses. Get loans from the Small Business Administration in Washington. I was talking with them a month ago, and they were intensely interested. I do not suggest this the way that some of the nationalist groups do, as a rival to the prevailing white economy. To me, that's nonsense. I suggest it in the sense of urging every Negroes to participate fully in every aspect of American life, including the economic. In addition to businesses, cooperatives, credit unions. In the rural areas, agricultural co-ops. Speaking of agricultural co-ops, I visited Israel last January, and there saw some of the kibbutzim and the moshavim, and was intensely impressed with them. While I liked the kibbutz very much, I thought that they were a little advanced ideologically to be transplanted to our southern climate in the United States. But I felt that the moshavs could be. We hope within the next year to open up at least one pilot project along these lines from people who have been poured off the plantations, which are breaking down systematically. Buy some land, put them back there, let them work the land cooperatively. Whereas neither one of the families could buy the mechanized equipment that's needed, cooperatively they could buy mechanized equipment. Well, we have also started some producing cooperatives in the South, in Mississippi, and in Tennessee. They now need to be started, and we will urge their establishment in northern slum ghettos. Third, remedial education. In many universities, I see that quite a few of the students have engaged in tutorials in the slum areas, the ghettos. This is fine. It's to be applauded. Because when you have a young man who is not only unskilled, but who does not have the basic reading skills or arithmetic skills, knowing what numbers are and what they symbolize, then it is hopeless to speak of retraining him for a skilled job in an automated industry unless you can first provide him with the basic reading skills. Needs to be a remedial education program. I am astounded at the number of youth who cannot read. Not only black. In Appalachia, I've seen many white youth who have gotten to high school age, either dropouts or still in school and don't know how to read. Their skills can be repaired. There is now the technical know-how to repair their skills and to do it in a reasonably brief period of time. Bank Street College of Education tried it summer before last, a pilot program, taking kids with skills of 0 up to 3rd grade and training them over the summer. At the end of the summer, they were reading up to par. One kid who had no skills at the beginning, at the end of the summer, wrote poetry. Another who had 3rd grade skills, at the end of the summer, wrote a one-act play, which was produced by a little theater group. So what a renaissance is possible. What a waste now is going down the drain. So we are urging that the war on poverty in its expansion include a massive crash campaign of remedial education. Now, these are the things that we think are essential now. I urge you to join the fight just as you joined it in the battle against Proposition 14. Join us in the streets, where we will have to be in the streets still. Demonstrations are not yet over. Demonstrations will not be over until there is no longer discrimination based upon race, which necessitates demonstration as the proper tactic. But in addition to demonstrations, we'll be working in the community organization, political action, remedial education, and so forth. Come on in. The water is fine. It's not only our fight, it's yours as much as it is ours. You must make it yours. No one now can be neutral. We were not neutral on Mississippi. We were not neutral on Louisiana and Alabama. We were not neutral on Selma. Few Americans were neutral then. Now let us have no more neutrals on the problems of the slum ghettos in the northern cities, because where it will be in the next few years will be less in Mississippi and more in Watts and Harlem, Black Belt of Southside Chicago, and elsewhere. Your job, mine. As Hillel put it, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? If I am for myself alone, what am I? And if not now, when?
In approximately 10 minutes, there will be an informal discussion and question and answer period next door in the men's lounge with Mr. Farmer. You are all pleased to come, and please use the main entrance outside in the lobby. Thank you. Mr. Farmer. Informal discussion and questions and answers from anybody who would like to ask them. This one, I also take the opportunity to thank Mr. Farmer for participating in this forum, because of course with his demanding schedule, it's extremely difficult to work something like this out. So I guess I can start. If any questions, anybody like to begin?
Well, I know on campus we had a spoke program for last summer, and I know this made it very easy for those of us who wanted to do something. It was just to write the course and hand it to us on the platter board.
Yeah.
I know after the summer, I thought, with what you said, it's going to turn to the north. And are some of the organizations going to have programs like this in their own areas? So I know a lot of people said, well, I couldn't go down to that, stay around home, something like that. And I know that there's enough colleges in the LA area. If they put 20 kids from each college into Watts helping those people and working with the people, then the problem will be solved very soon. So there'll be some emphasis in making programs like this available easier.
Yes, we intend to make them available early in the spring for the summer for work in the northern ghettos.
Excuse me, I must also ask, if you can possibly speak as loud as possible so everybody can hear the question.
Shall I?
Yes, I have a question. I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but I come from...
Could you speak up, please?
I come from the eastern area of Pittsburgh. Now, when I come out here, I'm surprised, of course, I come over the radio and perform some news commentary. And what the announcer will add, he'll add comments, secondhand, such as no, really. You see, when talking about the Watts area.
Yeah.
I don't see any repercussions because of his action. To the east, you'll have boycotts of the studio, products or time sold by the studio, but I don't see any activity in that area here. Do you have any plans?
Well, I wonder if Don Smith is here. Is he? Don Smith is chairman of Los Angeles Corps, and perhaps he can answer that question better.
I regret to say I didn't hear the question.
Oh.
I'm saying that reporters here comment on the news with respect to Negroes, and nothing is done about it, just ad-libbing or adding to their personal feelings. You see, the radio station does continue with this. Now, in the East, it's worn out to a large degree, but here I'm quite surprised you can't continue. No repercussions.
Well, we have frequently, as a matter of fact, all the time, we ask for equal time when any statements of a derogatory nature takes place. It is extremely difficult to get equal time here. We have, in many occasions, I have appeared 3 or 4 times recently, for example. I appeared once recently mentioning a statement, an editorial on KNXT that gave a kind of praise to Chief Parker that we were not quite in favor of. And very often it is extremely difficult to get this time, but we do fight it.
The gentleman here. The question is, wouldn't a pattern such as was followed in the Depression days under the New Deal, the WPA and PWA and the CCC camps and the other agencies, be better than the pork barrel anti-poverty program that we have today? I think it would be an improvement. I would like to see certain changes in the anti-poverty program. I would like to see much greater emphasis upon the community action programs than upon the city-controlled poverty programs, which will, by the very nature of the case, become pork barrel and patronage giving. Well, we're trying to. Our position with regard to the war on poverty is that of critical support, emphasis upon critical. We support it. When one part of the program is good, we work with it and try to help it along. When we feel that it has shortcomings, we criticize it, and our criticism is not to bring an end to the war on poverty, as the critics of its enemies try to do, but instead to improve it. And we also press additional programs upon the war on poverty. One thing that we are urging on them now is something that I mentioned a few minutes ago, and that's a massive remedial education program to be funded by the war on poverty, by the OEO. The young lady in the second row. Yes. Yes, I could ask you, what were you and the lady doing talking during the concert? I can imagine how the people sitting around you felt. But I know. The question is anything being done to educate the whites not to be so much afraid of the ghettos? They think the ghetto is a horrible place, like a jungle, and they're afraid if they walk down the street, a lion will run out and grab them or something. Well, that's a difficult problem to solve. And I think it's basic to the fact that we have 2 cities and really 2 nations here. There's little communication between the slum ghetto community and the rest of our cities. Little communication indeed. And it's 2 ways. Many of the Negroes who live in the slum ghettos have had no contact or communication with white persons except master-servant relationship. Their contact has been with their bosses if they have worked outside of the area. And in most cases, that contact has been of an unhappy nature because their jobs have been menial jobs, and many menial employees get pushed around by their bosses. Or they've had contact with their landlord or the rent collector of the landlord, which has been a hostile one, or contact with some of the store owners where there has been some exploitation. I think that the problem is much bigger than I mentioned today in the speech. Racism and racial prejudice growing out of segregation in our country has become a part of our culture. Our children, our babies, literally breathe it in the air now. They suckle it from the breasts of their mothers. It is extremely difficult for a white person or a Negro to grow up in our segregated society without having at least residual prejudices and having a stereotyped image of other people and having all sorts of absurd fears about each other. I think there has got to be a mass campaign in our nation of cultural re-education. This is one reason that core chapters have been spending a good deal of energy on the image question, on having more Negroes in advertising, Negro models used in advertising, not as Negroes, and not only in the ghetto area, but in national magazines, on television, in newspapers, and elsewhere. Now, this is not primarily to gain more jobs, because the number of jobs that would be made available thereby would be very limited. It is for image, so that people will see that Negroes are pretty much just like white people are. They have different skin colors, and white people become as dark as Negroes sometimes when they lie under the sun on the beach. And they'll see that when a Negro kid rides a skateboard, he falls and skins his knee, it hurts and it bleeds. And he runs crying to Mommy. And Mommy kisses it and puts a Band-Aid on it, flesh-colored. And along that same line, the use of Negroes in plays, television plays, and Broadway plays, as well as movies. Civil rights organizations, and this campaign was started years ago by the NAACP, to stop Hollywood from stereotyping Negroes in roles. You know, the Uncle Tom roles, the step-in fetchers, yes, sir, boss, our show is happy. Anything you says is all right with me. Or the clown, or the buffoon, or the petty criminal, or the dice shooter, or the watermelon eater. I stopped liking watermelon when I learned out it was a part of the stereotype. And it's only recently that I've gone back to liking it. But there was a play in New York on Broadway called Subways Are for Sleeping. There was a crowded subway scene. The 7th Avenue IRT subway going uptown, that is going up to the heart of Harlem. A midtown scene. This crowded subway, people hanging from the straps, no vacant seat, crowded in like sardines in a can. There was not a single Negro face there. Now, this, of course, defied reality. So what we're urging is that Negroes be used not as Negroes, but just as people. If the play calls for a doctor, or a lawyer, or a dentist, or a policeman, a detective, a nurse, or a street cleaner, then why not have a Negro fill that role? I think if this is done widely enough, it will tend to help change this stereotyped image. And in changing the stereotyped image of the minority folk, you change the stereotyped image of the community in which those people live. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes, when was this, do you know?
This year? In March?
August. Was it a march that was planned?
It was more or less a mass demonstration.
In August?
Well, here's the boss. The question is about Corps' use of techniques which may not be applicable to the northern scene. It's alleged that Corps was planning Selma-type demonstrations in Los Angeles in August, and many persons criticized these plans on the grounds that the situation was not analogous to Selma, and thus the tactic that was being used was not the appropriate one.
At this moment, I cannot recall Corps having planned any Selma-type demonstration in August. This happens to be news to me. But in a very general way, I must point out that sometime a tactic is developed and someone on the outside does not realize exactly what we wish to achieve by this tactic. And until they come in and confer with us and determine what is we wish to achieve, they cannot properly assess the efficacy of the tactic.
May I add to that, that we use different tactics at different times depending upon what we see as the requirements of the situation. We may make mistakes, and I know we do. I know many times we've made mistakes. But I think the sky will not fall if a few mistakes are made of this nature. We try very hard to tailor our tactics to the requirements of the specific local situation. Yes.
Yes, last night I was reading an article in commentary, the August 64 issue, and the article was written by Samuel Lavelle, and he was referring, he was writing about the historical position of the Negro in voting Democratic vote, how they had switched from Republican to Democrat,
Yeah.
and how they had shifted from being strike breakers to the staunch supporters of the union. Now, I was wondering, since you mentioned something about the possibility local civil rights groups might either not give any support or they might support Todd Lindsay. What technique, if switch over to say Lindsay, where they've normally been the
Oh, yes. Well, the question is about political action. There was an article in Commentary in 1964 in which it traced the evolution of action within the Negro community, political action, showing that at one point Negroes supported the Republicans and they switched from the Republicans to the Democrats, and they switched from being strike breakers to being staunch supporters of trade unionism. Well, now, if I suggest that Negroes in New York who have traditionally been Democratic will support Lindsay, what sort of campaign would be used to persuade them to make this switch from tradition? Well, my feeling now is that a growing number of Negroes, of people in the Negro community, are more inclined to support and vote for the man and his policies than to support parties. There is less reliance upon parties. You noticed that when Goldwater was nominated by the Republican Party, many leading Negro Republicans left the party then. The party loyalty was less than their loyalty to the cause, as it were. And I think that is a growing tendency. Would you agree with that, Don?
Yes, I
Now, let's see. The young man in the back with the white sweater, jacket. Employment.
I can't exactly say what is planned in the valley since we do not operate in the valley. However, San Fernando Corps, the chairman is Leon Garrett, is working in the valley, and they, I know, are engaged in some kind of community organization at the same time. At this time, its scope and its projection I do not know. Incidentally, Los Angeles Corps has been working in Pacoima at an anti-poverty protest, something that the mayor office cooked up, and we were able to stop it completely. We worked through the Local 300, which is a union of indigenous people in Pacoima. And that is all we have done in the valley.
Yes. Yeah. I know. Oh, we've had a running battle with the craft unions, especially the building trades unions, for the past 3 years. It has not paid off very well. We have not made much impact upon their policies. In New York, where we started the campaign 3 years ago, we did have some slight improvement. The electrical workers, the IBEW, International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, did take on 200 Negro apprentices, and this was a first. But the other building trades unions have not broken through. This is one reason that we are emphasizing the political campaign now. The city could change the building trades policies and do it quickly by merely enforcing the law that exists. They could withhold contracts from those builders if there is discrimination on the job. Our campaign in Cincinnati, perhaps you've read about the campaign we've had there for the past 2 months, where a number of Corps people were arrested, and there have been marches, and I participated in one march there a month ago, is aimed at ending discrimination in the building trades unions. But they, as you know, will not only exclude Negroes, they exclude many whites too. And many of those unions, or some of those unions, you can only get in if you're the son of a father who was a member of the union. And in others, you have to be sponsored by a present member of the union in your application in order to get in. They tend to operate on the old scarcity and demand notion, supply and demand. If you can keep the supply down low while the demand is up high, then you can get higher wages. It works, except that it hurts me. Yes, Don.
We have a very interesting project going in Los Angeles in this respect. Our employment committee got together the membership, not the membership, but the directors of about 50 unions. And we're using members from these unions to pressure other unions to develop apprenticeship programs. Incidentally, after the uprising in Watts, the building trades union refused to give any top of priority to the people from Watts in the rebuilding. And we are using many unions now as a part of the pressure group to get this change.
Very good. There's so many hands, I don't know which one to call on next. I have seen this young man's hand up for some time. Yours. Yes, yes. Mm-hmm. You think it would have been unfortunate for Corps to take position? Yeah. Pretty much I agree with it. Let me explain my position and explain what happened. This was at the Corps Convention, first week in July in Durham, North Carolina, when a resolution came out of the Resolutions Committee onto the floor of the convention, to a plenary session, calling for the immediate withdrawal of U.S. troops from Vietnam. This was debated and voted on and was passed rather overwhelmingly. I think it was not overwhelmingly, more than 2 to 1. This was a closed session. I then asked for the floor as a staff member, and floor was granted, and I stated my view that this was a mistake, though my personal opinion is in keeping with the resolution. I had expressed my personal opinion on many occasions and had participated in peace activity through SANE and through, that's the committee, National Committee for Sane Nuclear Policy, and some other peace groups, and had spoken, had even participated in a teach-in. But I felt that it was a very grave mistake for Corps as an organization to take that position at a time when we wanted as broad a base as possible. When we were talking about community organization and of expanding and broadening our policy, for us to take an official position which would narrow that base rather than broaden it. Now, there are many people who agree with my stand on Vietnam, my personal stand on it. There are many who do not, many who vigorously oppose my personal stand on it. And many of those who oppose my personal stand on it agree with our position on civil rights generally and support the civil rights revolution. I don't mean financially here. I mean with their bodies and with their activities. I felt that it would be a mistake for us to narrow that base by taking a position which would exclude them from Corps. Now, if Corps, I would oppose even more strenuously, Corps taking an official position in support of our government's policies in Vietnam, because that too would narrow it, and furthermore, I think that would be wrong. But if we do not take a position as an organization, then Corps members are entirely free to be Corps members, whatever their views on Vietnam are, and participate in civil rights activities. They are free to take whatever position on Vietnam or international issues that they choose, and to participate in peace activity through the peace organizations of their own choosing. That's the way it is now. That's the way it should be. I understand that many Corps members in the Los Angeles area are participating in the peace demonstrations today. And this is true in other areas of the country as well. But the organization, as an organization, is not participating. I don't know which was next. This man. No, it is not my experience. Maybe Don knows more about what is happening in the Watts area than I do. You know, there's been just canvassing for a brief period of time, I believe.
Yes. I would like to say that very often the retraining programs deal with jobs that are non-existent or deal with jobs that are about to disappear. Naturally, you'll be surprised how sophisticated the youth in Watts have suddenly become. And they know this. And you can't bring anything and palm off on them. But in an area where you have meaningful jobs, you'll find you have more applicants than you can handle. And incidentally, Corps and NVAC are at this point engaged in something called Operation Bootstrap. And they are getting more applicants than they can handle, because the jobs they are projecting, and this is not a governmental project, this is a civil rights project. The jobs they are training the people for are jobs that have meaning and they can use for their futures.
I found this to be true all over the country, really. Young lady. Yes. Yeah, right. Yes. Yes. Very well put. Yes, many of the Corps chapters are working on this, trying to get Negro history, not as a special course in the high schools, but get Negro history integrated into a study of American history, the contributions that Negroes have made to American history. You are quite right. I enthusiastically agree with you that this is a grave lack, and it damages Negro kids and white kids alike by limiting their education. They don't know contributions that Negroes have made. This is true in colleges too. I occasionally run into, not occasionally, very often, run into college seniors or college graduates, sometimes history majors, who've never heard, for example, of W.E.B. Du Bois. Don't know who he is. Never heard of him. I've run into seniors in history who are not aware that there were many Negroes fighting on the Union side in the Civil War. They thought they were sitting that one out, that they were down there strumming guitars. And there are many who had never heard of the Negro slave revolts and were not aware that Negroes revolted against slavery, never heard of Nat Turner, Denmark Vesey, Gabriel Prosser. And the history books, as you indicate, in high schools, frequently paint the Negroes as being happy and contented slaves, fitting admirably into the slave system. The old Magnolia myth, you know, sitting under the magnolia tree, strumming guitars and singing sweetly of the hereafter. And here again, it's a part of the cultural thing I was talking about. Even in preschool books. I was, a couple of years ago, looking through preschool books, which my little girl had gotten as gifts, a whole stack of them, to see what kind of an image she'd get of herself, or the other kids would get of her. And in most of them, I found that she wouldn't see herself at all, unless she was carrying somebody's bag, or was in an absurd position with a string tied around her toe, and other kids laughing at her and poking fun at her. This is slowly changing. I am seeing more preschool books now that do have Negro faces and white faces in there. But the whole thing needs much more work than it is currently getting. You're right. Yes. Core. Yes. Yes.
Well, but how do you get contact? I mean, it was at 1 o'clock at night in front of my house. The young lady with the baby was dragged out of the car. Now, it was me who called the police.
Yes, I think so, right.
I mean, I imagine the office would be closed at that time. I mean, who would you get in contact with?
Well, of course, a stranger would know who to get in contact with CORE. But if you were a member of CORE, you would know immediately to call. You would know to call Bob Freeman of the Police Action Committee, who handles these complaints all the time. And he would have rushed over there, or he would have called someone and sent out to see what was going on. Incidentally, we have a kind of project that we call Police Patrol, where two youngsters in a car follow the police. Yeah. And when they stop to investigate or to search someone, they stop behind them and they take data on the police, the number of the car, the numbers of the police, and just what happens. Incidentally, these fellows are well known by the police and are often harassed themselves and searched. So it is an extremely difficult thing, of course, because you can't have enough people to follow all the police. But they just get in touch with CORE and get the right telephone numbers.
Is CORE in the phone book?
Yes, CORE is in the phone book, and the number is Dunkirk 61430.
Yes.
I heard about a meeting that Negro leaders had with Robert Kennedy, Attorney General, that was held in New York.
Yeah.
And I got the impression, that my father doesn't like Robert Kennedy, unfortunately, that the Negroes became convinced that he was only interested in the Negro Revolution so far as it could help him politically. Aside from this, I'm interested in whether Negroes have the feeling that many white liberals, quote unquote, are only interested in the Negro Revolution so far as they can flamboyantly further their own careers and not sincerely interested in the Negro problem.
Yes. Well, I was not present at the meeting with Bobby Kennedy, to which you refer. I was in jail at that time, down in Louisiana. But I heard about the meeting, and I know that some of the, well, it wasn't a meeting of Negro leaders. There were writers and artists and performers. I think Lena Horne was there. Miss Hansberry. Yes. And Baldwin, Jimmy Baldwin was there, and so forth. They were distressed. I talked with Baldwin about it later. He was distressed. He felt that the Attorney General had no real understanding of what was happening in the Civil Rights Revolution or the Civil Rights Movement. Just did not know what was going on or what Negroes were thinking or feeling, and felt that it was largely a political matter with him. Now, the second part of your question was?
I'm just curious,
Oh, how Negroes look upon liberals. Well, perhaps you've read some of the articles. There have been many articles around in newspapers and national magazines on the, quote, white liberal, unquote. And that's become a bad word in the civil rights movement now. There is considerable tension, to be perfectly candid, between the most active activists in the civil rights movement and what they term white liberals. Now, by white liberals, they mean those who were not willing to take a firm enough stand or go all the way, or who, when the chips are down, will say, well, now let's sit down and discuss it and see whether we really ought to do this and go this far if we are not demanding too much. The feeling has been that they have been generally weak-kneed. But that does not include all whites. As a matter of fact, in CORE, you'll find many of the white members of CORE who are hardest on white liberals. It's a name that does not include everyone who is liberal and happens to be white. It's a kind of thinking. Yes. Oh, so many hands. The young man in the rear. Mm. Yes. Maybe Don would have something to say on that, but first let me say that in the East, we have included Puerto Rican problems, which are very similar to Negro problems, and are working closely with Puerto Rican organizations. And there is an alliance and a coalition there. And I understand that the same thing is happening on the West Coast with Mexican-American groups and with Indian groups. Don could be more specific, but let me say that it's understandable, I think, that most of our activists, our young activists, have a preoccupation with their own problems. That's understandable. When a man is in a lion's den and the lion is about to chew him up, it's very difficult for him to be concerned about the tiger that is lurking outside, that is about to chew somebody else up. But it is a responsibility of leadership to show the similarity and the identity, indeed, between these problems and the necessity for alliances.
Los Angeles CORE is engaged in a problem affecting American Indians in Arizona. And we have a task force working in Delano, California, where 2,000 grape workers are on strike. And these are Mexican Americans, and they needed nonviolent training, and they needed people who had been involved in mass movements. And we have a task force who's been working with them for several weeks. Lou Smith, staff member from National CORE, wants to add something here.
Well, ever since I've been assigned to the Western region, since I've been into Arizona, I've become very interested in the Indian problem. So now I have a time to help you use a little pressure for me. I've been trying to get the national office to let me hire an Indian field secretary.
Get us the money for it.
A guy right off of the reservation. I ran into a lot of problems on reservations that I'm not very familiar with, and I thought it would be much better to have an Indian. Since you brought that up, you have a member from Los Angeles who's a member of Los Angeles CORE who's now working in Mississippi, and he's become extremely interested in the Choctaw Indians up in Neshoba County. And he just sent me a letter. It's real funny. He's interested in my problem of getting an Indian field secretary, and he also is trying to get an Indian on staff there. And he's also written to the national office to start research on getting Indians the right to vote, even though they still live on reservations, and starting some type of litigation to going up to the Supreme Court. So we're extremely interested in this problem. Also, to help to answer your question, in San Bernardino, where we had the school boycott going, that was a combination of both Negro and Mexican mothers to pull out of the community.
Very good.
I do quite a bit of writing and research on contemporary news and entertainment. I just wanted to ask you two questions. In the last year, many of the, quote, white rock and roll stations have been hiring Negroes, and some of the, like, Negro rhythm and blues stations have just in the last year started playing what they call blue-eyed soul.
I hadn't heard that phrase.
First part of the question, has CORE been putting any pressure on these stations to kind of, reciprocal agreement with white? And also,
Do you know anything about this?
Durham's book on the Negro cowboy, which proves that there were Negro cowboys.
That's right, yeah, yeah. But we don't want to antagonize the Indians, though.
I regret I'm somewhat lost with the nomenclature of the rock and roll and the personalities you describe. However, we have for a long time been attempting to get more Negroes on the communications media. I recall just last year we had an action against KFWB, which lasted for 10 days. And then they settled, and they have, I believe they have one Negro announcer, news and disc jockey, and they have several office workers.
Yes, in addition, I think it would be a good idea for the Negro stations to hire some white people, too. I think it ought to be reciprocal. But I think that in the issue of job discrimination, this is not the crucial issue. Like some people in New York raised the question, you're fighting to get Negroes jobs. How about Chock full of Nuts, which hires only Negro waitresses? Well, we said it would be wonderful if they hired white waitresses, too, but most of the white waitresses made much more money and could make much more money. And the people made it chock full of nuts, in spite of Jackie Robinson. I don't know. I'm sorry. I must let you know I'm a square. Yes.
Well, I don't know what you're referring to, frankly. Yeah, but I'm talking about the staff members. No, we have been recruiting our teachers initially. Sure, some from college, some from the Negro community. But the idea is that the highest in the class will then stay on in the center as instructors. It's not so much of bringing in people from the outside to lift the people up, but it's starting to getting the people in the ghetto themselves moving in that respect. We have a lot of other projects to go along with that. One of the things we do encourage very strongly is for whites now to start looking in a way to their own communities and attending meetings of all the different types of organizations in their communities and finding out what their backgrounds are, what their philosophies are, and seeing in some way if we can't link, if no more initially, maybe just speaking engagements between people from all the little community organizations in Watts coming to talk to people, we'll say, in Beverly Hills, and exchanging this way to help break down this communication barrier. Yeah.
Yes. What are they doing to counter what? Yeah, well, we're doing a number of things. We are lobbying for public works program, a widespread public works program. We are backing the labor movement in its fight, which is now lost, apparently, at least temporarily, repeal of 14B. And we are fighting also for minimum wage law, that is federal. These are things that are needed. I am also very much interested in an idea that was put forth, not original, but it was put forth by Pearl and Reisman in a recent book, New Careers for the Poor, which suggests that there is a wide range of new jobs, potential new jobs that can be available, that require only limited training and skills, do not require real professional training, as social workers' helpers, or social workers' aides, and as teachers' aides, and in hospitals and so forth. But I do agree that there have got to be new jobs made, and this would come through the rebuilding of our cities, it seems to me. There's much need for expanded schools and more schools, better schools, and in the building of them it produces not only jobs for the building trades, which is why they are crucial here, but also more teachers and teachers' aides, for rebuilding transportation systems, and more hospitals and roads and so forth. In other words, the new jobs will not be in the manufacturing industries. That, to me, and I'm not an expert, but it seems obvious, because we are able to produce more and more goods with fewer and fewer people. And this trend will certainly go on. I think the new jobs will be probably in service industries and in building. Well, I don't think so. You see, the states that have pushed for right-to-work laws are the very states that practice segregation. And they have seen the right-to-work laws as something to preserve segregation, to keep the unions out, because they fear that the unions might bring white and black workers together. Often they don't, as you indicate. But they want to keep them out because they think they might, and some of the industrial unions would. The supporters of 14B are the racists and the segregationists in most of the communities. They're the same people. We have the same enemies, and if the enemy of my enemy is usually my friend. Yes. Yes. Well, I was giving my own personal views, not the views of my organization. I don't put myself forward as an expert on Vietnam. I am very glad I'm not President of the United States and have to deal with this problem, because I don't think it's a simple one at all. It's extremely complex. Nor do I agree with much that many of my friends say along the lines of this being primarily a civil rights issue. I don't think it is primarily a civil rights issue. I think that there are racial implications in it, but it's not a race issue primarily. I am in favor of Corps taking a position on South Africa, an official position against apartheid in South Africa, an official position in support of independence for Mozambique and Angola, Portuguese territories there, because I think there we have a very clear racial issue. But in Vietnam, the racial implications are secondary to the political and international implications. Now, I don't claim that I know how we get out of Vietnam. I'm not sure that, don't want to go into a long discussion on this, but I'm not sure that unilateral withdrawal is the solution. I think there has to be a ceasefire, but I don't know how to get it. I wish I did. And I hope that Dr. King, who is much wiser than I, does know how. And I hope he'll go to Vietnam, and if he can bring us peace in Vietnam and release those $25 billion that we want for war and poverty here, then he's my God.
We have time for one more.
One more question, then. Let's see, we'll come to this side and in the back. Yes. If they created what? Except competing with whites? Well, no. Let's take the second question first, and then go into the first question. I said not competing with whites. I don't mean don't compete with whites. What I mean is not building up a parallel economy, a black economy. You can't build up a black economy there. That's what I mean, yeah. Right. Now on Malcolm X. I don't know who killed him. I am sure that the black Muslims did not. And right after his death, of course, the press had already convicted the Muslims, the black Muslims. They were just assuming that they were the ones who did. Malcolm, I respected Malcolm very highly. He was a friend of mine, though we debated and we argued, and when we were on a platform, you wouldn't have thought we were friends, but we were. He was over at my home 2 days before Christmas. He had heard I was going to Africa, and we spent about 3 hours together. He was telling me something of his trip. He told me then, incidentally, that he expected to be killed. He thought he was going to be killed. I asked him who. At that point, Malcolm thought it was the black Muslims. He said, Brother James, he insisted on calling me Brother James, that Brother James, I think that the only black people in this country who are capable of murder and assassination are the black Muslims. Later, he changed his mind. I don't know if you've seen his autobiography. I don't think it's officially published yet. I got the page proofs from the publisher. He dictated this over a long period of time and finished dictating it just before his death to a writer. And he told this writer, just a few days before his death, said, you know, all along I thought it was the black Muslims who were trying to kill me, but I know what they're going to do because I taught them a lot of the things that they do. Said, but now these people who are after me are doing things that the black Muslims wouldn't do. Said it's somebody else. Two. He added two. That gave me pause. Then I learned that he wrote a letter from Egypt to a friend of his in the Midwest saying that he had been poisoned. And he woke up in the middle of the night with violent stomach pains and called a doctor who pumped out his stomach and told him that he had been poisoned. While I was in Africa, I was in one certain country, a certain city, talked with an old friend of mine who'd been over there for less than a year, who told me that Malcolm was going to be killed. And I asked her when. She said probably before April 1st. I said, well, that's calling it pretty sharply. By whom? Black Muslims? She said no. Said they're out to get him. They probably want to beat him up. They might shoot him, but I doubt that. Said, but there are others that are out to get him.